The bodies of two young women were found in a remote forest. Signs of a struggle, blood on the grass, and disfigured faces shocked police. Their intimate encounter, recorded in their final moments, turned the tragedy into a high-profile case, discussed nationwide. The disappearance of two young women sparked a tragic series of events that would later be cloaked in dozens of rumors, speculation, and official documents. The missing women involved were 22-year-old college student Jennifer Wilson and her 20-year-old friend, Kelly Morgan. Both women lived in a small town in Ohio. They met during their sophomore year of college, and their relationship quickly blossomed into a romantic relationship. Although some of their friends knew about their relationship, it caused controversy and tension in a community steeped in conservative views. On the day of their disappearance, according to investigators, the girls drove to the outskirts of the city, leaving their phones in the car. The car was later found parked near a forest belt several kilometers from a busy highway. Neighbors and friends noted that they often walked together in similar places. That evening, the girls did not return home. Their parents raised the alarm just a few hours later. The first step was to contact the police. The local department officially accepted the missing persons report that evening. However, in the first hours, no active search was conducted. Officers assumed the adult girls might have left voluntarily. Jennifer's family claimed that such behavior was out of character. She always called ahead if she was going to be late. Kelly also contacted her mother daily. The next day, the relatives began their own search. They walked the forested area, questioned passersby, and contacted acquaintances. One of the volunteers reported a strange discovery to the police. Footprints were spotted several hundred meters from the road, extending deep into the forest. This prompted the police to launch an official search. The search involved dog handlers. Police combed large swaths of the forest. The dog's trail ended about a kilometer from the car's parking lot. An empty plastic bottle and a piece of fabric, later identified as Kelly's, were found in this area. Relatives claimed it was part of her jacket. The situation became increasingly alarming. Local media leaked information about possible threats the girls had previously received on social media. Several anonymous accounts had posted offensive messages outlining their sexual orientation. Investigators were not ruling out the possibility that this could be connected to the disappearance. 2 days after the disappearance, panic erupted in the town. The parents held a press conference, publicly appealing to the possible kidnapper for the return of their daughters. Volunteers and local residents joined the search en masse. Teams of several dozen people combed the forest. By this point, the police had officially declared the girls missing and brought in additional forces from neighboring counties. A simultaneous check of CCTV cameras was conducted. One recording captured the girls' car parked near the forest around 7 in the evening. Cameras installed along the highway no longer showed their movements. This reinforced the theory that the girls had left on foot and were never seen again. A key piece of evidence for the investigation was the testimony of a man living in the forest area. He reported hearing loud screams and dogs barking that evening. At the time, he dismissed it, thinking it was teenagers. His testimony later became one of the first indications that a violent crime had occurred against the girls in the forest. Thus, the first days of the disappearance were marked by anxiety, uncertainty, and a chaotic search. Police wavered between theories of voluntary departure and forced disappearance, but the gradually accumulating evidence increasingly pointed to a tragic outcome. On the 4th day after the girls' disappearance, police organized a re-examination of the forest. Volunteers, sniffer dogs, and a helicopter equipped with a thermal imaging camera were brought in to help with the search. The search began in the areas where individual items had previously been found and gradually moved deeper. Around midday, a group of volunteers came across an area of flattened ground with dark stains. A few meters away, they discovered the bodies of Jennifer and Kelly. They were lying on the damp ground, with signs of a struggle nearby. The bodies were partially naked, raising further questions for investigators. Personal belongings were found near the bodies: a jacket, a sneaker, and a broken necklace. Police immediately cordoned off the scene and called forensic experts. Initial examinations revealed that the girls' deaths were violent. Multiple stab wounds were found on the bodies. Forensic experts suspected the attacker acted aggressively and chaotically. The investigation particularly noted that the girls' faces were severely damaged, which could indicate an attempt to conceal their identities or the perpetrator's rage. The presence of intimate traces sparked discussion among experts. Investigators considered two theories: a sexually motivated crime or a staged murder. The first theory was supported by the traces of touching and the position of the bodies. However, some details were inconsistent. No condoms were found at the scene, and fewer traces of bodily fluids were found than expected. Police also paid attention to the surrounding area. It was established that the forest was frequently frequented by local residents, hunters, and random passersby. Witness interviews revealed that 2 days before the bodies were discovered, several people had spotted a suspicious middle-aged man wearing a dark jacket. His description matched 2 different accounts, heightening police interest. The crime scene was meticulously documented. Experts recovered shoe prints, cigarette butts, and footprints on trees. Investigators hoped that this evidence would help identify the perpetrator. Of particular interest was a shoe print left near the bodies. It belonged to a popular brand of shoe sold in nearby shopping centers. The autopsy confirmed the brutal nature of the crime. It was determined that death occurred approximately 2 days before the bodies were discovered. The primary cause of death was multiple stab wounds to the chest and neck. The girls' arms showed signs of self-defense, scratches and wounds, indicating they had attempted to fight back. The press actively engaged in the case, focusing on the girls' personal relationships. Headlines mentioned the murder of a lesbian couple, which immediately catapulted the case into widespread public attention. For the families, this was an additional blow. Instead of grief, they were faced with journalistic attention and heated public debate. Under public pressure, the police declared the investigation a priority. Task forces were formed, and experts from neighboring counties were brought in. Initial findings indicated that the killer may have had extensive knowledge of the area. The bodies were hidden deep in the forest, but not too far away for them to escape. This strengthened the theory that the perpetrator was a local resident or someone familiar with the area. Thus, the discovery of the bodies became a turning point. It confirmed the family's worst fears and elevated the case to the category of especially serious crimes. The investigation had obtained its first physical evidence, but simultaneously faced a wide range of questions. Was the motive personal, related to the girl's sexual orientation, or was it a random attack? The answers to these questions would be found in the following weeks of the investigation. The double murder investigation was immediately transferred to the district police department. Local police lacked sufficient resources, so they brought in forensic experts from neighboring towns. The first step was to systematize all the evidence found: blood, tissue, and cigarette butt samples were sent to the lab. Additionally, specialists took impressions of the shoe prints found near the bodies. The investigation considered several theories. The leading theory at the time was a sexual assault. The intimate circumstances of the crime pointed in that direction. However, some forensic experts expressed doubts. The evidence suggested a crude staging rather than a planned rape. A second theory was a personal murder connected to the girl's circle. Threats on social media were taken into account, as were conflicts with certain acquaintances who were unaccepting of their relationship. Witness interviews revealed that a man in dark clothing had indeed been seen near the forest belt on the day of his disappearance. 2 eyewitnesses claimed he had been watching the road without moving. Police issued a profile, but were initially unable to identify the man. The investigation was complicated by errors in the first few days. Specifically, the area where the footprints and piece of clothing were first noticed was not immediately secured. This led to potential evidence being lost or damaged. An internal investigation confirmed that patrol officers underestimated the danger and treated the relatives' report as a voluntary departure. The autopsy was a crucial step. Forensic experts confirmed that both girls died from multiple stab wounds. It was established that the stabs were inflicted with a sharp object approximately 15 centimeters long. There are no signs of binding on the bodies, indicating a surprise attack. Defensive wounds on the hands and forearms confirmed that they had resisted. Police checked nearby stores and pharmacies where knives and similar items were sold. No purchase records matching the time of the disappearance were found. However, investigators noted that the knife could have been a household item and belonged to the killer beforehand. Investigators questioned the girl's circle of friends. Friends and teachers described them as calm and non-confrontational. Jennifer's parents mentioned that several weeks before the tragedy, their daughter had complained of anonymous threats on messaging apps. However, determining who exactly sent them proved difficult. The accounts were registered under fictitious names. At the same time, police were investigating the area's crime situation. Over the past 6 months, attacks on women had been reported in neighboring counties, although no proven connection to this case was found. Investigators hypothesized a possible serial offender, but the evidence proved insufficient. Media coverage of the case increased the pressure. Journalists published articles about hatred of minorities and criticized the police for delays in the first hours of the search. In response, law enforcement held press conferences, emphasizing that they were pursuing all leads. The situation changed after the initial DNA test results were received. At the crime scene, in addition to the girl's fingerprints, biological material not belonging to them was found. This suggested the presence of an unrelated person. However, there were no matches in the database at the time, slowing progress. Another line of investigation was the examination of shoe prints. Experts determined that they belonged to men's athletic shoes, size 102. Such models were sold in large quantities, but police requested lists of recent purchasers from local stores. This yielded several dozen names, but none of them led to a quick answer. Thus, the investigation proceeded along several lines, checking the girl's circle of friends, investigating possible connections to online threats, and searching for an unknown man seen by witnesses. Despite mounting evidence, investigators had no clear suspect. The crime was causing widespread controversy, and a lack of quick results fueled criticism of the police. The emergence of the first physical evidence allowed the investigation to focus on identifying specific suspects. 3 lines of inquiry emerged as priorities: the girl's circle, men seen in the forest area, and individuals with criminal records who lived nearby. The first suspect was Kelly's former classmate, Thomas Rivers. He openly expressed negative views about her sexuality and had a history of aggressive remarks. Comments of his using derogatory language were found on social media. Police searched his home, seizing knives and clothing. However, forensic analysis revealed no matches for DNA or shoe prints. Thomas's alibi also proved correct. He was at work in a neighboring town on the day of the girl's disappearance, as confirmed by video footage. The second person to be examined was a middle-aged man, David Hudson, a resident of a nearby village. Witnesses spotted him in the woods on the day of the murder. Hudson claimed he was walking his dog. Interrogation revealed inconsistencies. He could not accurately state the time of his visit. A search of his person revealed shoes of a similar brand to the footprints found, but the size did not match. Furthermore, DNA testing did not confirm his involvement. Despite this, Hudson remained a target of investigation for several more weeks. The third focus was investigating online threats. Investigators were able to trace one of the anonymous accounts to a computer used by a teenager in a neighboring county. He admitted sending offensive messages but claimed no connection to the disappearance. His alibi also proved correct. Particular attention was paid to men with previous convictions for assault. A county resident, Michael Stevens, who had served time for assaulting a woman, was identified in the database. He lived nearby and had previously worked in forestry, knowing the area well. Stevens acted nervously during questioning but denied involvement. A knife was found in his home, but its characteristics did not match the murder weapon. No biological traces of the victims were found. Meanwhile, DNA analysis of the samples found at the crime scene revealed that they belonged to a Caucasian male. However, there were no matches in the national database. This meant that the suspect had no prior criminal record or was not included in the database. The investigation gradually expanded the circle of people being investigated. All residents within a 5-kilometer radius of the crime scene were interviewed. Particular attention was paid to those who owned cars and could quickly leave the area. Police even checked employees of construction companies working nearby. At this point, the prosecutor's office intervened. Public pressure demanded that investigators identify a specific suspect. The media actively criticized the police, pointing out that several months had passed without any progress in the case. A breakthrough came when experts re-examined the shoe prints. A comparison revealed that a similar model of shoe was sold in a limited edition at a store in a neighboring town. The storekeeper provided a list of customers. Among them was a 32-year-old county resident named Richard Caldwell. He had a history of minor offenses, lived alone, and frequently frequented the wooded area. Police placed Caldwell under surveillance. He was questioned a week later. He denied meeting the women, but could not convincingly explain his whereabouts on the day of his disappearance. A search of his home revealed clothing with stains that could have been blood. A preliminary blood test showed a match, but a definitive DNA test was needed. This discovery became the basis for Caldwell's arrest. In a press release, police reported significant progress in the investigation. However, the defense argued that the evidence was dubious and could have been linked to other circumstances. Despite this, the public perceived the arrest as a step toward solving the crime. Thus, by the time the preliminary investigation was completed, the police had a circle of trusted individuals, but Richard Caldwell was their primary focus. The investigation had to prove his guilt in court and confirm that he was the perpetrator of the double murder. Richard Caldwell's arrest marked the starting point for the trial. The district attorney's office filed formal charges of double murder committed with particular cruelty. The key evidence was the results of a blood test on the suspect's clothing and a match to shoe prints. The trial began 9 months after the tragedy. The courtroom was packed with journalists and relatives of the victims. The case generated widespread public outcry. Some demanded the harshest possible punishment, while others doubted the strength of the evidence. The prosecutor's office presented its case materials. They focused on the forensic analysis. DNA from blood found on Caldwell's jacket matched that of one of the victims. Additionally, they presented evidence from a shoe print that matched a pair of sneakers seized from the defendant. Prosecutors emphasized that Caldwell knew the area where the bodies were found and was unable to provide a convincing alibi. The defense relied on a lack of evidence. The lawyers pointed out that the blood could have gotten on the clothes accidentally, and the sneakers were mass-produced. The defendant claimed he was a frequent visitor to the forest and could have left the footprints at any time. He denied any involvement in the murder. Witnesses testified at the hearing. One of the search team's volunteers testified that he had seen Caldwell near the crime scene several days before the bodies were discovered. However, the defense insisted that such coincidences could have been numerous, as the forest was used for walks by residents of the area. Forensic experts presented their findings on the nature of the wounds and the time of death. They confirmed that the girls died during a period consistent with Caldwell's lack of an alibi. However, no direct evidence was presented that his knife was used in the murder. Public opinion was divided during the trial. Some saw Caldwell as a clear criminal, while others said the police were attempting to close the case under public pressure. The media actively covered every stage, focusing on the intimate details of the girls' lives, which caused further tension among the families. After 3 weeks of deliberations, the jury returned a verdict, guilty. The court sentenced Richard Caldwell to life imprisonment without parole. The sentencing was accompanied by tight security. The girls' relatives wept in the courtroom, while the convicted man himself continued to protest his innocence. The trial concluded, but questions about the completeness of the evidence remained. Some experts argue that the investigation may have missed other leads, but the case was officially closed. For the police and prosecutors, this was a result that allowed them to quell criticism, and for the victims' families, it was a final end to the tragedy. Caldwell's conviction put an end to the case, but doubts about the evidence remained. The girls' families secured punishment, but the publicity brought them new trials. Police stepped up surveillance in the area, and a mistake made in the first days of a search became the subject of disciplinary action.